Oh, hello my friends, hope you are well. Today I'm back out with the Swamperial Guard army build, and I'm combining a couple of 40k kits to build my version of the malleus rocket launcher, which I'm calling the Snotling Barrage Buggy. Let's get into it.
Swamp miniatures.
So, I'm using the same two kits I used to make my bombast cannon last time, being the Field Ordnance battery kit and the Snotling Blood Bowl team, but I want this to look quite distinct from that build, so I'll be trying to use the pieces in a much different way this time. The pump wagon was of particular interest to me for this kit bash, and originally I'd planned to basically just build this and stick a couple of rocket launchers on top of that, but after I'd actually put the pieces together, I realised this was way smaller than I'd originally thought. So I went ahead and yanked off these wheels as a new idea was now growing in my brain like a squelchy little tadpole growing into a majestic green frog. I decided I'd attach this artillery carriage onto the back of the pump wagon, with the pump wagon itself now becoming the cab or the kind of driving compartment for our mechanized rocket launcher. So I first went about cutting a little channel into the bottom section here for the end of this trailer piece to slot into, but I realised the cab would not be sitting very level if it was glued in like this. I therefore took a little offcut of sprue and stuck that down onto the trailer first, which acted as a kind of spacer between the two pieces and allowed the cab to sit in a much more upright position when glued together, which looked a lot better. Next up, I began assembly of the front roller piece of the pump wagon, which looks cool as a makeshift swampy wheel replacement on its own, but could also double as one of those mine roller attachment things that tanks use in our Swamperial Guard head cannon. Of course, a mine roller made from a wooden barrel would probably be a kind of one-use thing that would shred the crew to pieces in a storm of splinters traveling at Mach 5, but it looks cool, so, you know, goblin stuff baby. Assembly of the rocket launcher pods themselves was next on my list, and this was pretty uneventful to be fair. I just glued the pieces together and they ended up looking like little Nurble-Werfer rocket pods, so yeah, no big surprises there. I also attached their mounting piece onto the carriage and glued on the shield piece thing at the back, just to add to that Cadian military vibe of it all and protect from any attacks up the rear end. I slot the rocket launchers themselves onto the mount in the center, and these are secured in place by this bracing piece which is glued across the two of them, which is cool because it means you can adjust the angle of them if you want. And then finally I finished off the build by adding a few more little details like this wheelie pole thingamajig from the pump wagon to look like an antenna, a little steering wheel here in the driving compartment, a great piece to flesh out the join between the carriage and the pump wagon, a couple of spare rockets on the top, and this little random foot pedal which serves no purpose other than adding a bit of extra greebliness. Oh, and I almost forgot to mention, I drilled some quick holes into a couple of the rocket launcher tubes so I could add some nice missile smoke stream trails later on, and that was actually the final bit of work I did on this. So here she is, boys and girls, the Snotling Barrage Buggy. This is not what I had in mind before I started the build. As I said earlier, I was pretty much expecting to just stick some rocket launchers onto the roof of the pump wagon, but I think this has ended up being a bit more of an interesting looking artillery piece and a much better fusion of the two kits overall. To me, this looks like a kind of Snotling equivalent of a HIMARS, which is pretty freaking cool. But anyway, now we have our big boy Swamp HIMARS built, we just need to add a few crew members to operate it. So of course I've selected some happy little Snotlings to hang out in our cab here, or hang off it in the case of these two little guys who I attached to the sides, and this green boy who's been given the honour of driving it around the muddy swamps. Then, following the Swamperial Guard head cannon of the bigger boys being smarter and more developed and therefore getting the higher ranking combat roles, we have a larger goblin fella here to command our little ones. He was made of a really simple kit bash from a leftover Gretchen head and a Cadian artillery crew body, and he is ready to lead the attack and keep the pesky little Snotlings in line, which is no easy feat. And with that, my friends, it is time to paint. Now, I'm not going to talk about the specifics of my paint job here today, as I'll be painting this the exact same way I did my bombast cannon last time, and I've been over the paint scheme for the soldiers in both the previous videos in this series, so check those videos out if you want to know more about the specific colour choices I'm using, as I'll be using these or something very similar to them at least throughout the rest of this army project. And if you're not bothered about knowing the ins and outs and my rationale for these colours, then kick back and listen to my rambling thoughts about the malleus rocket launcher and its place in my army. So when I first picked up the Cadian Field Ordnance battery, I thought the bombast cannon was pretty cool because it's basically like a little mini baby basilisk, but the malleus rocket launcher stood out the most because it looks awesome, and the idea of spewing out indiscriminate rocket fire onto our unsuspecting enemies just sounds like a good time. Like, who wouldn't want to do that? That is, however, until about 2 days ago when I actually started looking into the rules for this piece and realized it is actually a direct fire weapon within the 40k universe, meaning it requires a specific line of sight to fire on the enemy troops. So we can't have any obstacles or pieces of cover in the way that obstruct the line of sight. This old thing needs full-on eye-to-eye visual contact with the enemy to be able to fire. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, my beautiful viewer, but this weapon is obviously based off the Nobelwerfer, which is at its very core an indirect fire weapon. You know, this is not a precision guided hit a cornflake from 10 miles away kind of system. This is a around and find out. We know there's an enemy in that general direction, so let's blow up the whole bloody area kind of deal. So why on earth does the real life indirect fire area of effect equivalent require a specific line of sight in game when we already have weapons like the bombast that can be indirect fire? I mean, maybe I've just answered my own question there. We already have some indirect fire weapons, so they don't want to saturate that area of gameplay. But come on, Games Workshop, let me fire a whole barrage of rockets at someone without having to put my vulnerable ground troops at risk to lure enemies into its line of sight. And you might now be thinking, with these issues, why am I even bothering to make this piece? And the honest answer is the rule of cool. This thing looks super cool and has given me a ton of fun and enjoyment throughout the building and painting process. Although I am planning to build this 2000 point army to actually be able to game with, the building and the painting, and increasingly so the kitbashing side of this hobby, are the main sources of enjoyment for me. So having a good looking and effective finished army does give me a sense of direction to work towards, but it's not really this final goal that gives me the enjoyment that I'm after. It's the journey of making everything along the way, you know. Just like the cheesy saying goes, it's not the destination, it's the journey. And for me in this army, that is very much the case. I'm pretty sure that by the end of this project, I'll have a nice 2000 point army, which is all polished and lines up with the current meta, although it'll probably be at least 11th edition by the time I'm finished, so maybe not actually. But I know I'll probably have another 1000 or so points of random swampy Cadian kitbash units, just because I like the look of them, or because I wanted to play around with kitbashing new things. If you're like me and get the most hobby enjoyment from building and creating different minis, then don't be scared to make things just because you like the look of them. If anything, you'll just end up with a wider choice of units to choose from when it comes down to actually gaming, and some units which at first seem a bit pointless or underpowered like the ones I've made today might have a really weird effective niche use against someone else's army. And you never know what direction the meta is going to go in for the next editions, so what today might be a pointless, ineffective little unit could be the god tier weapon for reducing your enemies into a pile of steaming red goo in the next edition. Of course, if you have any tips or suggestions about good units or abilities to work towards in my current army, then I'd love to read about them in the comments section below. But either way, I'll still be playing around and making more things that look cool to me. And speaking of things that look cool to me, this paint job is now looking pretty good, definitely on theme with the rest of my army so far, so it's now time to get it onto a base and get this mini finished off. In my bombast video, I made a base I was really happy with, so I'm doing the same thing today, although I've streamlined the process very slightly. I start by sloshing down some homemade mud mixture. This one was quite a coarse mixture as I'd run out of my usual blend, but it still works fine. And then I soak in some watered down PVA glue once it's all dried off to seal everything in. Next, it's just a case of dry brushing on some darker greens and then some lighter greens for that mossy green swamp surface look, and then a coat of darker brown and a lighter brown to bring back some of that muddy colour back into the mix. I used some Athonian camo shade around the dip sections of the mud where water would pool naturally, and went over this with some Nuln Oil as well to give it a nice dark base for the swamp goo I'm about to add now. You're supposed to add this swamp goo in layers of 3mm or less, then leave it for like 24 hours or so to dry, but I like to stipple this on in a thin layer with a brush, then use a hairdryer to expedite that drying process by like 500 times faster, because who wants to wait 24 hours for your goo to dry? And this time I also experimented with adding a few layers of this stuff, drying it thoroughly between each coat of course, and I really like the effect it gives. It has a nice glossy, dank, green, swampy look to it like last time, but I think the additional layers have also given it a bit more of a varied look, which I am quite pleased with. I'll be using this basing scheme for my infantry bases too, but I still need to kind of work out a way to get that looking good on a smaller scale base, so bear with me on that. But for now, once I've got everything else attached to the base, I then just add a few more little plants and tufts of dead grass to add a bit of extra pizzazz, and we are now ready for the very last details of this build. Now again, if you saw my last video, you'd have seen the smoke blast I made for the shell emerging from the bombast barrel, and I felt like our barrage buggy was looking a bit naked without something similar, so I thought I'd add some longer, skinnier smoke trails for the rockets this time. Make a start on these by drilling out the ends of these two little rocket shells, cutting out a couple of lengths of floral wire, and attaching the two together with some super glue. I then take a cotton bud, fluff it all up, and cut a strip out using my finest nose hair trimmers. I run a bit of super glue down the length of the wire, fold the cotton around this, and then start soaking it all with the super glue. As I'm soaking the glue in, I use another little random offcut of wire to kind of shape some sections, just trying to make the smoke trail look a bit more natural and less uniform, with some little lumps and bumps here and there. When the glue's had time to dry off properly, I give the plumes a really quick paint job, starting with a darker yellow, followed by a lighter one around the bases of the rockets to imply the blast from the rocket fuel as they fly through the air, then dry brush on some pale grey over the lower portions of the smoke trail, and finally a bit of white over the whole thing to kind of blend the two sections together. The rockets themselves get a really simple paint job with some gunmetal metallic paint for the body of the shell, a quick splash of Nuln Oil, and then a nice vibrant red for the tip of the shell. Easy peasy. And these things probably only took like 20 minutes or so combined to make, but they add so much character to your pieces, so give them a go if you're looking to spice up your heavy weapons a bit. Anyway, after our mandatory rim job with some Steel Legion drab, the Snotling Barrage Buggy was finished. So, my friends, what do you think? Will it surprise you to hear that I really like how this piece has come out? Probably not, because I say it basically every time I make a video, but this one is looking especially good to me. I think this is way better than the original pump wagon Nurble hybrid I had in mind originally, and we've ended up with more of a lighter swamp HIMARS construction, fitting in with the Cadian modern military aesthetic, but with a distinctly swampy makeshift vibe to it. It's still really early days in this army, you know. I've made less than a tenth of the total points I'll be needing for my full minimum 2,000 point fighting force, so we've still got a really long way to go. But unlike a lot of projects I've taken on in the past, I feel no sense of apprehension or dread about the massive amount of work ahead of me. When I think about this army, I just get really excited because I feel like there's so many different options and so many different units I can take and kitbash to have a more custom swampy look to them, and it feels great to have a long-term project I'm so excited about. I'm sure there will be times where I do feel burnt out and annoyed about it, but as a whole, I think this is going to be a really enjoyable process. And the beauty of kitbashing means there will always be a high level of variety available to me, and variety is the spice of life, baby. As always, my friends, if you've enjoyed this, then please subscribe or leave a like or a comment. I've been seeing some slow but steady growth on the channel for a while now, and obviously I'm still a tiny channel by all comparisons. You know, I'm a little fish in the big pond, I'm a little tiny minnow swimming around with the big fat trout, and I'm gonna get gobbled up. But yeah, it's given me really good feels knowing that people are enjoying some of the things that I've been making. It's making me feel all warm and fuzzy inside, so thank you for watching and giving me support. It does mean a lot to me. But yes, I have been your friendly neighborhood swamp rat, and I will see you very soon in another video. Saw ya.